so far this year, 58 correctional officers at the Elmira State Prison have been attacked by inmates, and there has been more than 100 fights between inmates. Excuse me. Good evening. I'm Deja Gross.
And I'm Trina Catterson. Thanks for joining us tonight at 6. Guards at the prison say they are understaffed to the point where they are in constant danger. Our 18 News reporter Joe Mason went one-on-one with one of the top union officials who says state lawmakers are not listening and they're making prisons even more dangerous.
Elmira Correctional has seen a recent uptick in attacks on corrections officers. We spoke to a union rep for the officers to see just how bad the problem really is.
We're not incarcerated in there. We don't live in there. We just work in there. Give us a couple days. Give us a breather. Give us a little time to have your day off.
Correctional officers say the HALT Solitary Confinement Act seems to be to blame for the attacks. The act was signed into law in April of 2022 after years of discussion. It restricts the use of solitary confinement and puts limits on what prisoners can be put there and for how long. Elmira Correctional alone has experienced 58 assaults on staff and 104 inmate-on-inmate assaults this year. Here are a few of the assaults from the past few months. On July 4th, 3 officers were injured. 1 was struck multiple times in the head. July 21st, an inmate repeatedly punched an officer in the face after giving him his medication. Between July 24th and 28th, 2 officers were injured after 7 large inmate fights. Between September 24th and 26th, 5 officers were injured. 3 were sent to the hospital for cuts and pain. Do you think that legislators that support HALT care about the well-being of corrections officers?
I don't think they care at all. I think no matter how many times if they cared in the first place, they would have had a conversation. And if they don't care about us, they clearly are not going to change something that makes it safer. They, like I said, our members really believe that, everybody thinks, will someone need to be killed for change to happen? And the answer that these guys say, even if someone died, they think there's not going to be any change whatsoever. They think they're just going to keep it status quo. They feel like no legislator that supported HALT would even care if they died inside a prison right now.
He also says the law limits inmate penalties for any attack.
When inmates know that they only got to do 15 days, you're doing nothing for you up to almost to, you could murder someone and only spend 15 days in a special housing unit. And they know that there's no negative ramifications for their bad behavior. So why not assault an officer? Why not assault another inmate? They get more credibility in prison by assaulting one of us than doing anything else.
The law doesn't just impact officers, but inmates too.
The everyday inmate that does nothing wrong is penalized worse, has their programs being taken away from them because all other staff is being deployed to like your residential rehabilitation units and all the programs created with the HALT Act.
Additionally, Elmira Correctional and other prisons statewide are facing a staffing crisis. This in part due to mandatory overtime policies.
When we say facilities are short, we're not talking 1 or 2 officers. We're talking dozens. Members are leaving in droves. Mandates are through the roof. Mandatory overtime, meaning they work their 8 hours and they're stuck. People are getting, especially at this prison, they're going 3-4 days in a row where they can't go. They go home for 8 hours and they got to be right back. Mandated. They're doing 16-hour days every single day.
Prison closures have only made it worse.
Members used to stick around in work past their 25 years. It detracts people from coming in because they don't know if they're ever going to make it home. So instead of going across the state and then thinking you're going to make it back to Southport, these members from around here aren't going to take the job because they don't know if they'll ever make it back.
At Elmira Correctional, Joe Mason, 18.
We have some breaking news into our newsroom just now. An inmate at SCI Fayette has been found dead in his cell. The Pennsylvania Department of Corrections says 43-year-old James Jarzensky Jr. was found unresponsive on Saturday, later pronounced dead by paramedics. The Fayette County coroner is investigating the official cause of death, and state police will also be investigating.
This morning, we go in depth with the Target 12 investigators. This week, we're joined by Target 12 investigator Eli Sherman, who's here now with the latest stories they've been tracking. And Eli, first in Providence, a jury found John Santilli of East Greenwich guilty of defrauding a British investor. So we'll go through the details, but essentially he lied about plans to make a movie.
Right, Kate. So 49-year-old John Santilli told a British investor in 2018 he was going to make a movie based on the HBO classic Tales from the Crypt, which was popular through the 1990s. The investor sent Santilli $100,000 to get the movie off the ground, but after Santilli stopped communicating, the investor sued and found out Santilli was actually using that money to gamble at casinos. State police launched a criminal investigation and arrested Santilli in June of 2020.
Okay, so we know this isn't the first time Santilli has had a run-in with the law.
Kate, it appears to be somewhat of a trend. A year ago, Santilli admitted to defrauding investors of over $4 million for a live show that never got off the ground in Las Vegas that was based on the movie Magic Mike. Santilli hasn't been sentenced yet in that case, but federal investigators in California say he used more than $1 million of that money to gamble at casinos across the country. You can see a trend here. In Rhode Island, Santilli is scheduled to be sentenced on December 8th.
All right, so Eli, we're switching gears now. Target 12 has also been tracking the ongoing migrant crisis, of course, in Massachusetts, where towns are scrambling to provide housing and services to the influx of new residents.
Yeah, so this is something several Bristol County communities are already dealing with, and it often catches them off guard. We caught up with the Attleboro mayor this week to see how they're preparing.
As of right now, we have no migrants in Attleboro. We happen to have only one small motel in the corner of the city. I'm assuming it's going to happen at some point, but as of yet, I don't know. I do understand that when it happens, you get very short notice. So I'm actually putting together a migrant task force anticipating their arrival.
So the mayor says she also wants to use this task force to help neighboring communities where we know that migrants are already living.
Okay, so for people who want to see much more on these stories and others that they've been tracking, we have all of this on WPRI.com right now.
Brought the condition of those facilities into the statewide spotlight. And this afternoon in Frankfort, the Legislative Oversight and Investigations Committee held a hearing about the facility's current conditions. But things took a turn when the Department of Public Advocates alleged that the conditions are worse than the Department of Justice is claiming, the Department of Juvenile Justice. WKYT's Jessica Umbro was there and explains what happened.
Kerry Harvey of the Kentucky Justice and Public Safety Cabinet focused Thursday afternoon on what he says are improvements in the Adair Youth Detention Center's conditions compared to when a riot took place at the facility late last year.
I think they're doing a really remarkable job, and I think they're making great improvements.
However, things took a turn when Lauren Beeger Hunter, directing attorney at the Department of Public Advocacy's Glasgow office, presented allegations of mistreatment at the facility.
What we are finding in these records is there is no due process hearing, and the automatic sanction that is given is isolation.
Witnesses from the Kentucky Justice and Public Safety Cabinet and the Department of Juvenile Justice were given an opportunity to respond to the claims made by the Department of Public Advocacy. They said that they were caught off guard by the allegations and denied them.
I don't know that there's a way that we can respond to all these specifics because we had no notice of this presentation.
I'm very surprised to hear that information given, because that's certainly not my understanding at all.
But they do say that isolating juveniles will be used when it means keeping others safe.
Nobody wants any youth or anybody to be isolated. But if that's what you have to do to try to preserve safety, I mean, what else can you do?
In Frankfort, Jessica Umbro, WKYT.
Mayor today on whether he'll push for a change in juvenile justice laws during the next legislative session.
Well, not long after the city announced an arrest in the Morgan State University shooting, the mayor was turning heads today and making some bold comments about the juvenile justice system. On a community walk through North Baltimore today, Mayor Brandon Scott was taking aim at this state's broken juvenile justice system.
We have to build a juvenile justice system that works from the ground up. Every single portion of it has to be looked at. I've been talking about that for years now, as you know.
To hear him say that infuriates me.
Kenji Scott, the former leader of a juvenile justice coalition in Maryland, says the mayor has never endorsed an overhaul of the system.
I have talked to him about that, and he was very dismissive. So to hear him say that now is definitely a slap in the face.
Every city in America, every place in America has violence.
The mayor insists Baltimore is hardly alone in the war on juvenile crime and is calling on Washington to step in.
Nowhere in America is exempt from gun violence, and until we deal with this issue as a country, cities and states will be left alone to deal with it, and that's not enough.
This is not necessarily a national phenomenon.
Ryan Coleman is president of the NAACP in Randallstown.
I need him to do all he can do to stop this violence.
We need him to focus on what's happening in Baltimore, not what's happening in Timbuktu.
But longtime activist Kenji Scott believes the mayor's plea for a new system and new aid from Washington may be too little too late.
Everyone needs to do something except Brandon. The question is, what is Brandon Scott going to do about crime? We've yet to see that.
Well, the mayor was also touting the city's 18% reduction in homicides currently, but critics point out that that is only compared to last year and not previous years. Jeff Abel, Fox 45 News.
There have been 9 mass shootings in Baltimore this year. Thousands of cars have been stolen. But tomorrow's agenda includes converting city vehicles to zero-emission cars and establishing new standards surrounding zoning districts. Nothing to do with crime. And now a taxpayer expert is questioning the council's priorities. Fox 45's Jeff Abel joins us with those concerns and that part of the story. Jeff?
Well, when it comes to fighting crime, it appears city council members have been long on information and short on legislation. And tonight we're learning just how little action the city council has taken. 9 months after the start of the year, and city leaders are still vowing to stop the violence.
This is our first meeting of the year.
At a hearing in January, council members met with police and identified what was proving to be another violent year.
It's our time now to take back our communities.
Unfortunately, high levels of violence are affecting our young people.
3 months later, as juvenile crime raced out of control, the council called another hearing with police.
My hearing is just have a robust conversation about what all law enforcement to do to address crime.
We cannot let this happen again.
3 months later, after the city's largest mass shooting left 2 dead and 28 injured, council members called yet another hearing.
We demand to know the minute-by-minute details.
The reality is the residents of Brooklyn Park deserve better than that.
Citizens want action. They don't want talk.
Taxpayer advocate David Williams says action from the city council is long overdue. In fact, our analysis of the 299 action items which have come before the city council this year, just 2 of them have been crime related and adopted by the council.
It appears that they don't have the ideas because we don't see legislation really moving through the process. We don't see serious debate on pieces of legislation, on ideas.
We are honoring a matriarch of Hanlon Park.
City leaders have claimed progress with other issues.
Our goal here today is to discuss how the city can support returning citizens.
But Williams insists it's time the city takes serious action toward curbing crime. Taxpayers, he says, have no more time to wait.
Every member of the city council has a responsibility to the citizens to look deep into these problems and not just talk about them, but actually figure out why things are broken inside of the city and come up with solutions to fix those problems.
Well, among the actions the city has taken this year is establishing a registry for arson defendants and requesting final action for local control of the city police department. We're live tonight. Jeff Abel, Fox 45 News.
Earlier this week, left that game postponed and many of the homecoming week festivities canceled. Tonight, police are still searching for those responsible for injuring 5 people Tuesday, as a $9,000 reward is being offered for any information that leads to an arrest. And City State's Attorney Ivan Bates is now vowing to hold the shooters accountable.
It should have been a celebratory weekend at Morgan State University.
It's just sad that the innocent have to suffer now for the guilty. So I hate that our weekend has to end like this.
Instead, homecoming festivities halted after a mass shooting Tuesday night injured 5 people, 4 of them students.
It was just like a ton of shots in a row, and then it stopped, and then more shots in a row.
And since the chaos unfolded on campus,
can't get a break. We can't get a break. And I understand it was for the right reason, but
It's heartbreaking.
A college tradition like no other has been tainted.
So when you're at a historically black college university, homecoming means so much. It truly is coming home.
Police say they're looking for 2 shooters and 4 persons of interest, announcing a $9,000 reward for any information that leads to an arrest.
Right now, we talk with the police about the investigation. I have been updated about that. Let's just say it is moving.
Okay.
And it is moving, I feel, in the right direction.
They believe the shooters were targeting an individual who ultimately was not shot.
Once individuals know they will be held accountable for these types of actions and acts, they will change their behavior.
Speaking on WBAL Radio's C4 and Brian Neiman show, Baltimore City State's Attorney Ivan Bates Friday promised those responsible will be held accountable.
When you sit down and look at it, now you could potentially have 4 or 5 counts of attempt murder. Each account holds life sentence. This individual is the type of individual, the type of case that we go to trial, we need to be asking for a life sentence. That's what we plan to do for the gentleman, Jason Billingsley.
Meanwhile, Mayor Brandon Scott is doubling down on his stance that the problems we're facing with gun violence in Baltimore are primarily a nationwide issue, and Congress will have to enact stricter gun legislation to make change.
I think that when you look at Maryland's laws around guns and gun violence, we have some of the best in the country. The guns are coming in from other places, other states. That is why this is a national issue. It's a both and, Mackenzie, not an either or.
Over the years in Annapolis, there have been a number of bills that would increase the penalties for committing violent crimes across the state. Those include the Violent Firearms Offenders Act and the Repeat Violent Offenders Act. Both stalled. We sent questions to Mayor Brandon Scott asking why he hasn't supported those policies. If the plans are introduced again this year, we asked will he support the legislation and use his position to urge other lawmakers to support them as well. If not, what specific bills is he working with the Baltimore City delegation to introduce to hold gun offenders accountable? And is it time for mandatory minimums to be considered in Maryland for gun offenders? Our questions went ignored.
Additional security measures are now in place.